Rick, can you do the clap test? That's not a medical thing.
You ready, Joe?
No, the memory card covers it.
That's a technological thing. I'm a little worried about it. He may be able to.
They are.
We have
People make it easy.
no
You gotta see the front row.
we failed.
We know he's different.
Yes, we
I go back sometimes.
Do you?
Generations of people are going to be able to watch this on YouTube. So.
I do have to make a loud clap just to synchronize the camera, so excuse me for a second.
Just like peanut players.
It's like Peter Pan.
Very impressive. I'll just introduce. I'm SteveSawyer1. This is my 6th and final year of having the honor of serving as the president of the Antrim Historical Society. We have still another of Antrim's scientific elite with us today. Joan always hates when I make the following observation. When you look at the scientific minds that have come out of Antrim, her father, Winslow, Skeezy, her uncle who invented particle board, Joan and Frank have done important medical research. I look at Ben Pratt, who was the engineer, New Hampshire engineer of the year. Bob Bernstein, who seems to be doing a lot in sustainable agriculture. I just spotted George Coy, who's done some important medical research on allergies. And this is still another one of the scientific highlights out of Antrim. This is Steve Sawyer, and he has a very interesting background. He was in the first group of students who went 4 years to the Condell High School. And his personal background is interesting, and please correct. Some of what I'm going to say is accurate about you, and some of it is lies. And I'm gonna. At age 16, Steve lost his father, and at that point, he became responsible for the family finances. And at age 16, before he went to school, he used his pickup truck to deliver newspapers to retail stores and also to some private customers. At that point, well, in 1973, as you remember, the Arab oil embargo began, and the price of gasoline just exploded. And this led young Steve at age 16 to start thinking about the downside of fossil fuels. Simultaneously with taking over the family finances and trying to support the family with a pickup truck, he became aware that PCNH of Sainted Memory, now Eversource, had charged ordinary residential customers substantial amounts of money for building the Seabrook nuclear plant, which also got him more interested in sustainable energy. Right after college, he started to work for Greenpeace International, and he's been specializing in energy issues ever since. For a number of years, he represented Greenpeace on energy and climate issues. Since 2007, he's been the first General Secretary General.
Not a communist.
Okay. This is true. Secretary General, like the United Nations Secretary General, but not the General Secretary that comes from the Soviet Union. Or China, or any other wonderful regime. And he represents major wind energy associations and major wind energy companies at the international level. He is not chicken salad when it comes to international representation. He's cooperated with the United Nations Framework on Climate Change and the International Energy Association. And he has been particularly interested in opening up energy markets, especially for wind, in Asia, Latin America, and Africa. So Steve sees wind and solar as renewable technologies going forward that are going to lead societies into a more sustainable energy framework. So we are delighted we have one of Antrim's own back to talk to us, Steve Sawyer.
Thanks, Steve. That was mostly true, except I wasn't really supporting the family. I was supporting myself.
Makes it better.
Somebody here, well, at least my family will know that that's not true. Thanks very much for having me. Bill Nichols, who I don't think could make it today, asked me to do this about a year ago when he wanted me to talk about it. I can't even remember what, but they keep adding topics on, so now I have 5 sort of things to talk about. I'll try to go through them relatively quickly so we can have some discussion and Q&A. But I would also say, I've been told this is a very informal setting, so if you want to stop me and ask questions, or my brother wants to correct me, we can do that in medias res, so to speak. Okay, vital statistics, I won't take you through all of those. Many of you will know some of these people, or remember some of these people. Just Bill asked me to visit the Historical Society to trace back at least a ways. So as far as I know, we've had somebody living in Antrim since 1867, which is when my grandfather, as an infant, moved over from Stoddard with his father Charles. And then in 1871, Enos Hildress, my grandmother's father, moved in and started the sawmill on Great Lake Road. She operated until 1904 or 1905 or something like that. But we had a sort of a divided family because the Sawyer side of the family and the Hildress were from Clinton Village, and the Wheelers and Gammons were from South Village, and worse than that, the ones from the South Village were actually originally hailed from Vermont, so it was always kind of a risky mix of things. My grandmother was a fixture in the stone church in the center, playing the organ at its dedication in 1899. And she taught in the little schoolhouse just below that for about 30 years. My grandfather was, by all accounts, not a very industrious sort of character and has left no serious record of any great achievements of any kind, except staying married to my grandmother for his entire life. On the other side of the family, my grandfather and his wife and my mother, when she was about 1 or 2, moved down here from Claremont. He worked for the Boston and Maine Railroad, and he came here to be the station agent at the Antrim Bennington stop on the Boston and Maine Railroad, which is pictured up there, in 1912, I believe. They both lived the rest of their lives here. He was very, very proud of his car. Kenny will tell me if that's a Model A or a Model T. I can never remember. I'm not quite that.
Looks like a T.
I think it is a T. And Kenny still has the license plate for it, which is 3988, which was not a vanity plate in those days. It was just that there were less than 4,000 cars registered in the state of New Hampshire. I'm very proud of that. There's the family. I believe that's up at the family home on Prospect Street. Although now that I look at it blown up, it doesn't actually look like it's there. That's my grandfather Frank, his wife Amy, my mother and father, and my older sister Janet, who unfortunately left us in 2008. And the little boy in front is my baby brother over here, Winslow Jr. The house on Prospect Street where my mother and Joe lived, it's still there. It still looks pretty much the same. The rather blurry photo on the front is my grandfather and his wife sitting up on top of Monadnock when there was still a building on top of it. And my grandfather always used to take great delight in showing me the old snow roller, because he had a sleigh, and they used to roll, before they plowed Main Street, they used to roll Main Street so the sleighs could ride up and down easily, and he had that in his barn for a while. I don't know what's happened to it. It's over in Darien?
Society's making noises about trying to resuscitate it.
Be better than salting the roads, that's for sure. My parents, who some of you may remember, my father was born in Clinton, my mother in Claremont, who lived here when she was an infant. They were sort of flappers, growing up during Prohibition and getting up to all sorts of kinds of stuff. And one on the left is from about the time they got married in 1937. My mother in the lower center fancied herself something of a looker, as she was, and has all these posed pictures. Unfortunately, none of them are really good to blow up. And then the outrageous swimming costumes they wore in the 30s, there on the right. And my mother at that same visit up on top of the Antrim when there was still a building on top.
I know I've given you free rein here. Just try to stay in shot, will you?
Oh, sorry. Oh, it's a camera. There's two cameras. Wow, stereo.
Are we doing okay for hearing?
Can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
Is the mic?
Yeah.
Well, okay.
Just keep it careful.
I just don't like to stand still.
Yeah, no, that's.
Okay. Class of 1929, one of the largest which has ever graduated from Antrim High School. I think there were 17 of them. The old high school there on the left, which has been apartment buildings for as long as I can remember. And a bunch of notorious Antrim people were involved in that class, including Carol Johnson, my mother, who wrote an essay about great composers and artists of the pianoforte, and my father on the history of aviation, which wasn't very long at that point. But it played in his later career. And that is my mother and father when they were still courting in an old canoe, which is still up in the top of Kenny's garage, that she got for her 16th birthday during the period in which my grandfather owned the camp down at the south end of Craig Lake, which now belongs to George's cousin Sue's, and before that belonged to Dick Withington, and before that Price, and then before that was my grandfather from about 1920 to about 1940. He sold it in a fit of pique when my father moved to the Midwest after they get out of school to work at the Rock Island Arsenal with Robert Goddard building rockets, or what eventually became rockets. And then the war came and he tried to enlist. He said, well, you can do it if you want, but we're just going to send you right back here. So that's when my older brother and sister were both born in Davenport, Iowa, because they were out there. And then after the war, they eventually relocated to the Boston area, where my father, this is the whole family now, just about. Missing, of course, is my very much missed older sister Janet, who left us in 2008, and Kim was not there that day, but she's here today. This is up at the lake. But my father moved us back to Boston because he would get involved in this little startup company called Arkham B. Little, which was down in Fall River, and spent most of the end of the 40s and all of the 50s flying back and forth to Japan doing reconstruction, paid for by our tax dollars, to create infrastructure to rebuild the Japanese economy. So flying around the world for a living is something which apparently is in my blood. Myself in the 50s, I didn't do much. The center photo is for my older sister's first wedding, where I was I forget what I was called. My sister was the ring bearer. What was I called?
She was the flower girl.
I was the ring bearer. She was the flower. Whatever one does. It was a long time ago. 1960s, not much to report either. My father got ill in 1960, had an aneurysm, and they saved his life. And no one's really very sure whether they did him any favors, but I did the first half of first grade still in Massachusetts, second half in Florida, and then back to Antrim, where we've been going summers, because the camp that now belongs to Ken, my parents bought the same summer I was born in 1956. And in between the time when they had the camp on the lake, which my grandfather, my maternal grandfather had they were renting various places, including that place, I think, the same place that they eventually bought, because there are pictures of my grandmother standing next to it at least, but various places around, but moved back to reside there in the autumn of 1963. And you can't really see the program of the piano recital, which Bill's mother Izzy put on there, but you'll know some of the names. My sister Karen, Joanne Jennison, Dale Putnam, who's still in town, Ray Sweeney, who's still in town, Brian Riley, I can't remember who else is on there, but Izzy had us doing all sorts of strange stuff, including my theatrical debut at age 8 as the star of the musical Cowboy on the Moon, performed in the town hall. Of course, fortunately, there is no historical record of any kind, long before these cameras were invented. Thank goodness. Here's my 6th grade photo, one of whom I see has arrived. Your town moderator, who's in here. Are you still the moderator?
Yes, I am.
Very good.
Second row up, third one in from the left is me.
That's right. And some of these folk are still around. I hear from Laura Basanti from time to time. Peter Martell with a bow tie, professional bow tie. Jen Cody down on the lower left. Dale on the lower left. And the only one that I can't identify is the one next to Dale.
That side,
Yeah.
Danny Keating.
That's Danny Keating.
Yeah.
Right.
Danny has since moved back in Nantucket.
Nantucket. Okay. Good. Everybody. This was the entire 6th grade. Yeah. Yep. And our much beleaguered teacher up in the upper right-hand corner, Mrs. Foster, who, after we tortured her so badly, she got busted down to 2nd grade.
Yeah.
We were not very nice, especially when it involved Gordon Jennison, who was down in the lower center, was the focus of much of our attention for a variety of reasons. And, got to the point where Mrs. Foster put him behind the piano in the corner of the room so that we couldn't torture him. So instead we would climb up on the piano and you keep all the paper, the writing paper and the math paper on top of the piano. We knocked the paper over on top of Gordon. So at one point he left the classroom rather abruptly, howling like a wolf, and went out and climbed up a tree. And of course the principal, Mr. Schiff, to go out and extract him from the trees. We were not very nice to each other or to the teacher at that time. What else happened in elementary school? Arthur, John Davies, and myself were a trio who hung around and did everything together up through, I don't know, 5th or 6th grade, either at his place or we had the go-karts up at the Merrill Farm, and building dams out in the woods out behind Ella Dutton's place, or Ella Davies, or whoever she is now, and having a wild out time, including, some of you may remember at the ball field there was an old lookout tower. I don't know what it was a lookout for.
Observations during the war with planes.
Exactly, but I mean, in Antrim, seriously?
Yes.
A lookout tower?
There's several observations.
Okay. Well, I don't know if they ever saw any, but when in 1963, it was partially fallen down. And the 4th graders all were very cool because they'd climb up on the roof and they'd jump off and grab this tree branch, and the tree branch would bend down to the ground and then get off. And John Davies and I got up there one time, we were looking at this thing, and the 4th graders came up and they wouldn't let us get down. So we had to actually do it, the 1st, 2nd graders to do it. So we did. And I was so proud of myself when my big brother came home from college a couple of days later, and I dragged him up to the ball field. There was a ball game going on. And I was paying so much attention to him, I jumped off at the top of the building, didn't come close to the branch. Broke my arm. It was just a simple fracture. We'll see in a few weeks. But it was, they tore down the building. I think I was not the only one that happened to. And I'm spending way too much time on this, I can tell, so I'm going to speed up. 1970s was amusing more. We were at Conval. family long hairs, and there's my pickup truck. And as Steve mentioned at the outset, after my father died, I got really pissed off at this construction work in progress charges thing that appeared on an electric pole. At that time, the estimate was that the Seabrook station was going to produce two 1,200 megawatt reactors for $1 billion. At the end of the day, they got one done for $7. So that was $7,000 per man, woman, and child in the state of New Hampshire for half of what they promised 12 years late. And Sam Lovejoy was the first sort of activist person that I ever paid attention to. He's the guy down in Montague, Mass. who, I forget which electric company it was that put up a net mast to judge weather conditions for building a nuclear power station in Montague. And he drove out one night and moved his pickup truck to the net mast and pulled it down. Then turned himself into the police, and there was a big trial. And then Seabrook, I think, was arrested at that one. Well, it still goes on. In university, it was strange. I went in that same pickup truck with my friend Peter Lamb, because as a freshman I was not allowed to arrive on campus, with the two of us looking like roadies for the Allman Brothers. And I get to this little college outside of Philadelphia with these guys arriving in their Rolls Royces and their Mercedes, and all dressed up in suits and ties and yarmulkes. And I remember hauling my stuff up into the room, in a concrete box as it was, and sitting down, looking around. Peter looks at me and he says, "You sure you want to stay here?" I said, "Well, okay, yeah, I guess I will." He said, "I'm out of here." So my truck. That was the end. But it was an excellent school, but I'm not going to get into that. I learned a lot, but I learned that it made me appreciate Antrim a great deal more. And the other thing that I think helped me or drove me in the direction of becoming an environmentalist was that the entire time I was in Philadelphia, people would make fun of me because I would always complain about the water and the way it made my hair feel. And I blamed it for starting to lose my hair, although you can't tell it from the picture. But it was already starting to fall out, and it was noisy. It was never quiet at night. It was always trains or trucks or something, all the rest of it. So this was something that always disturbed me, and it was only later when I came home that I figured out that that's what disturbed me. So I got out of school, and my previous ambitions, as outlined on the previous page, to become a rock star or a professional baseball player, both proved to be ill-founded. I alternately, had signed up to become a welder's apprentice on a rig in the Gulf of Mexico, because I figured with a welder's ticket it was a great thing. You could travel the world, and if you ever needed work, you just walk into a machine shop, and you work for a day or a month. While I was waiting for that, some friends that I knew came around in Boston about this new organization that was just setting up shop there, and they had this big boat. It's not big, about 150 foot, and they were saving whales and stopping nuclear waste dumping and all the rest of that kind of thing. And I said, "Oh, I can do that. That would be fun." And I did it for the next 29 years on and off. This picture in the lower left is when they were up in Newfoundland, stuck in the ice in 1982. And the others are from, well, one on the right is our first Arctic expedition we did with 2 kayaks, an inflatable, a big tent, and a radio that didn't work in 1980. We went back later with icebreakers and helicopters, and that was a lot more effective. Then, in the middle 80s, through various permutations, we took the old ship, the Rainbow Warrior, and put sails on it and made it into a ship that basically had an indefinite range. And it could stay at sea for as long as you could have food for. We made it in the water, and we were leading the flotilla to the nuclear weapons testing site, the French nuclear weapons testing site at Mururoa in French Polynesia. And on the way, evacuated an island full of 325 victims of the U.S. nuclear weapons testing program from an island called Rongelap, which is the largest U.S. test in history. The Bravo test in 1954, a 15 megaton one. The radiation actually came directly over their island. The most, other than the people of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, they're the most radiated people in history from nuclear weapons, and they had been stayed there and evacuated and moved back and used and tested as guinea pigs on and off by Brookhaven National Labs for about 30 years. They wanted to move. We had a ship, so we relocated them on the way. But the French were not very happy about our plans to lead the flotilla to Mururoa And after having planted spies in our office in New Zealand, and our office in France, and our office in the UK, on my 29th birthday, July 10, 1985, a little birthday present at the conclusion of the party in the form of 2 large Semtex bombs, one on the side of the engine room, and the other one on top of the propeller shaft, which, as you can imagine, changed everything. And one guy died. The guy up in the left-hand corner, a Portuguese Dutch photographer with 2 small children, was trapped in the lower accommodation down below and drowned. And all of a sudden we're in the center of a major case of state-sponsored terrorism, the largest police investigation in New Zealand's history, and ended up in court cases and arbitrations that dragged on for years and brought Greenpeace a lot of notoriety that it wasn't actually looking for, but we were able to translate it in most places to something positive. Some of the inspirations, particularly the one at the end, who was my chairman and mentor for many years at Greenpeace. It's a bit dated now, we're already into the 21st century. Not so sure about the next one, that's another story. Then in the late 80s, early 80s, got together with the woman who is now my lovely wife, sitting right back there, and we began some institutional building of our own, along with the organization. We bought a house, then had a baby, then got married, as one does. Followed 5 years later by the little boy in the back who's sitting there. The biggest campaign that we were engaged in, which was led for a long time by my wife Kelly, was to protect Antarctica from minerals and mining exploration. The governments who were signatory to the Antarctic Treaty had in fact gotten together and signed something called the Wellington Convention, which was to open up mining for minerals and oil and gas and all the rest of it in the Antarctic. And we came up with a strategy. She came up with a strategy. We all implemented it, which actually overturned that and got an amendment to that, which was called the Madrid Protocol. So by 3 years after this thing was signed, we actually got the Madrid Protocol signed in Paris, which protected Antarctica for 50 years from any mineral and mining operations. That entered into force about 1993 or 1994, so we've still got a ways to go, but it's possible we could live long enough to see. And if there's any ice left in Antarctica at that time, let me see. I can't resist putting a photo of me and my friend Jane. Honorary Jane. That was from because Ted Turner helped fund this back when CNN was first getting started. So they gave us an award. So I'm at this award dinner in New York City, and we're sitting at the table with me and Jane and Ted. And Jacques Cousteau, General Obasanjo from Nigeria before he became president, Paul Brown, what's his name? Phil Donahue, all these people. And this is on the eve of George Bush the Elder's invasion of Iraq. And so Jane and I are the only ones at the table saying, no, this is not a good thing to do. And I was like, yes, we have to show that, because that was the invaded Kuwait or whatever it was. Anyway, that's an ongoing saga. In the late 90s, after I got out of the leadership of Greenpeace and got back to campaigning, I spent about 4 years working on impacts in the Western Arctic, in Alaska, Siberia, and Chukotka, and a little bit in northwestern Canada. Impacts on wildlife and, more importantly, on people. We did 4 expeditions up there with, as I say, there was an icebreaker in the background. I wanted pictures of the helicopter, which I'll have to take my word for it. It was a lot more effective than the one with the 2 inflatables, the tent and the radio that didn't work. Culminating with setting up an ice camp on the Arctic ice in January, February of 2000, at the site of where they were going to do this first major expansion offshore from Prudhoe Bay. We were up there for 3 months, I think, with the base. And actually what you see on the left, originally we had these little wind turbines to create for heat, but for electricity. And with great difficulty managed to get a couple of barrels of kerosene in there for heat, but found that the wind turbines produce so much surplus electricity that we just sent in electric heaters and we didn't have to burn kerosene at the end of the day. But it most likely clappers up in the winter time, and I would recommend it as a vacation spot for anyone, minus 50, minus 60, minus 70, I think, anyway, but pretty nice. About this time I switched over to focusing pretty much exclusively on renewable energy, and the first big campaign, again coordinated by my wife, I was a mere foot soldier on the political side, to get a global agreement on renewable energy and the World Summit on Sustainable Development in Johannesburg in 2002, where we got a huge amount of very good publicity, lots of support across the board, but at the end of the day, the then Bush administration, the Saudis and others were making sure that none of this was coming out. This was right after George Bush the younger had pulled out of the Kyoto Protocol. Anyway, it started some initiatives which bore fruit, one of which was my engagement in China, because I got to know the guy who was writing the renewable energy law for China. This was about 2002, 2003, and he kept inviting us in for consultations. The Chinese are, for a non-democratic country, they are extremely consultative. They will bring in experts from anywhere and everywhere and suck everything they possibly can out of their brains and go away behind closed doors and write the law. Which, in this case, it works, because after that law came into force in 2006, China has led the world by far in the development of both wind and solar energy. China has had, for many years, more solar hot water heaters than the rest of the world combined, and are now the leaders by far in both wind and solar. But I was surprised because Greenpeace had been blocked from going to China for obvious reasons for many years. Somehow that got unblocked in 2003. So all we did was translate this bloody report that we'd done in Europe. And it was front page of the newspapers. We had like 7 government officials up there on the podium with us, and it was the first thing in the national news. And it's a mysterious place, but it's a wonderful place. Other than subsequently when you can't breathe the air, I've had a fabulous time working in China. And it has its difficulties in terms of dealing with the government in terms of process, but if you are aligned policy-wise, you can make great things happen very, very quickly. There are some downsides, as I'm sure we all know. In 2006, I turned 50. I'd been with Greenpeace for 29 years. I was beginning to feel a bit like these guys. You know them from the Muppets, and say, we did that 20 years ago too, Mark. Kids today, blah, blah, blah. Plus, confronting climate as a daily thing, as my children can certainly testify. It doesn't make you into the confronting impacts of climate change on a daily basis every day as your job. It does not make you into the world's most cheerful person. So I had an opportunity. Again, this cartoon I've had up on my wall since, this is from like 1978 or 79. I love this cartoon. And have been working with the renewables industry for many, many years, and saw an opportunity. So I